right, we'll call the work session to order. I hope everyone can hear us. I appreciate the group in our audience here to come this evening. Wow, this is hot. Woo. All right, and I appreciate the board coming out and all of our principals and staff tonight. Just wanted to start out with a couple of things. First of all, we really appreciate all the input that we're getting. I think I've gotten and responded to dozens of emails, and I've talked to folks personally, and I know all of our board have really appreciate that input. And I know we've got questions that hopefully will be answered tonight, and we may come up with more questions. And I want to stress that this is a work session. It is not a place that we're going to make a decision. We may yet have another work session. It's unknown at this point, but you know, our next regular meeting is December 17th. The other thing I want to address is that there have been some comments or questions raised about the actions of prior boards, particularly during the newer and fewer in the last 15 years. And we're not here to cast aspersions on anything that they've done. They made decisions based on the best available information at the time. And we appreciate the hard work that they put in. And now we have almost 20 years better information and statistics, and we're going to try to do the best we can with that. And everybody's perspective is important to us. So again, I want to thank everybody, and I want to turn it over then to Pat, and let's kind of proceed through what we have for tonight. We'll get into questions for everybody tonight.
Okay, I'll try and talk clearly as some of the folks who are listening online question that. Again, no decision has been made. The board, this is a work session. On December 17th, if I am directed so, I will have a motion written. But as of now, we are simply at a work session. Now, starting out with a little bit of the history, how we got here. During the 4 or 3 public hearings, the 1 staff meeting, and then during meetings with the community, I brought this book, 1980, over 500 kids in a class. Right now we're 250. 250 times our 13 classes. We've dropped roughly 3,250 students. Now, that is every kid in 10 of our classes. That's every kid in 10 of our current classes. That's with open enrollment out taken away. So what a lot of people are saying, well, this is an open enrollment out issue. It does contribute to it, but overwhelmingly it is not the issue. Overwhelmingly, the issue is changing in demographics, which is fewer children and older population. This is the class that I spoke of in the yearbook, and this is where they're at now. Burlington, the average age of people who live in Burlington is well beyond childbirthing. Most likely we are not going to suddenly have an outbreak of children, and the chances of this demographics change altering in the near future is minimal. That's some of the history. Mr. Rector, I'd like to call you, where's Joe? I'd like to call you up and talk a little bit about the other history. And the reason I called Joe, he's been here for a long time, and he can talk to you, and I mean that in a good way. I do mean that in a good way. Anyway, it was mentioned that this was a huge deal, and it is, but it's not new to Burlington. And Joe, can you tell us a little bit about the past in Burlington while over your tenure?
Sure. I started in Burlington as an elementary principal in 2000, and I think at that time, Mr. Courtney, you may have been on the board in 2000. When the newer and fewer project started, and many closings have happened since then. We started with the newer and fewer. And originally we were looking at 6 elementary schools. And the board did take into consideration the demographics and the decline that was going on. And at that time I was principal at Perkins Elementary School. And So I know how the course people are feeling, and it's tough. Perkins was the school that was the man out at that time. That was the school where the 6th elementary school was supposed to be built. But we went through this very similar situation, and it is really hard. That was the closure of Central Avenue Elementary, Prospect Hill Elementary, Salter Elementary, Washington Elementary School. Am I forgetting any? Perkins, yeah, Perkins. And so it's very difficult when decisions like this have to be made. But when the decision by the board to go down to 5 rather than 6 was made, although it was real hard for us people at Perkins, sitting here now in 2018, thinking to myself, had that decision been made to stay with 6 at that time, where would we be? And so I commend you for what you're doing, and I know that you have difficult decisions to make here, and I know that you're making a decision that will impact everybody, but this is not anything new that we haven't been through. And so thank you, board, for your deliberation and your consideration for all that goes into this decision. And are there any questions for me that you might have about, you know, from the past? And Tom, I know you were there as well.
Yep.
So, all right.
I don't have any questions about it, though.
Thank you.
I do. Yeah, when I was talking to you and we went through the mock calendar of events that leads up to, that kicks off after the board makes a decision, I was very, very concerned about the children and transition plans and those type of things. And your exact words to me were something of the kids were okay. You held an event at the school, took down the flag. How'd that go?
We did. We had an end-of-the-year ceremony. Janet, you may remember this. It was an emotional time, and it is, because that's your identity. We had teachers that had spent their entire career at Perkins Elementary School. So we had a closing ceremony. We had an open house for people to come in that were alumni from Perkins to see the school. Our final act was when we took down the flag on the last day of school and folded it. And I believe we had the honor guard that were a part of that day. It's a time to celebrate, but it's a time to honor that facility as well, and the kids that have gone there, the staff that has worked there. And so whatever your decision that is made, whatever school is affected by this, I hope that same dignity can be brought to that facility. So.
Now, when you and I talked, you had mentioned that the kids handled it pretty well. Is that accurate?
Oh, the kids adjusted very well. The adults, change is hard. Change is hard for everyone. Our kids were very resilient. Many of our kids, you know, that went different directions fit right in with their groups, and at least we encountered very few problems. Our parents were really concerned about the change of logistics, because now we didn't have a school, and they were concerned about the neighborhood concept, but our children adjusted just fine, and adults eventually as well.
I don't think anybody else has any questions for you at this time.
It's always tough to do. It's always tough to lose a building. When we tore down Sunnyside, I had a woman call me and said she'd never speak to me again if we tore down that beautiful old building that her great-grandfather helped build. And I said, do you and your husband ever buy a new car? And she said, yeah. I said, all the old ones sitting in the backyard? She said, well, of course not. I said, that's the same deal. It's the building, we're tearing it down, put a new one up. I assume she never voted for me again. But, you know, it's just an emotional thing with people, because they, as you say, they attach to that building.
Tom, you remember watching Horace Mann burn, and the emotions that came with that, and the sudden end to a history of a school that had such a great tradition and legacy, and how everything had to change. We had to bring in huge portable buildings, and how well our students adjusted to that in a time of crisis.
I think the students adjusted much better than the adults.
I would second that, because I have been through all of this. I was there before you were, Joe.
Yes, you were, Deb.
Yeah.
Yes, you were.
And I would echo your sentiments.
I appreciate your comments on the closing and the ceremony and the honoring of that. I think that's important, and I know that the things that I've seen in the packet are, there's a lot of ambassadors and going between buildings and sharing that, and I think that, you know, however this ends up occurring, that's very key in the communication, and so we treat it somewhat like a grief process, but then we know how to move on to the next phase. So thank you for sharing that history.
Certainly. Thank you.
I want to say with your comment about the previous boards, when we did Newer and Fewer, I guess I'm the only one here that was on that board, and we did what was right for the time. I would venture to say, that was 25 years ago, I would venture to say 25 years from now, this will turn out to be not that great a decision. But right now, it looks like we need to do something here. So you never know. I mean, we made a good decision for the time, and it was the right decision, but who knows?
Sure.
If some big factory come in here and built and brought in 10,000 people and said, boy, that's smart that Berlin School Board did that, wasn't it? So who knows?
You know, hindsight will always
Yeah,
be 2020.
2020 always.
Yep.
Yeah, and I did contact Randy Miller today and invite him to the meeting. I did ask him if he'd attended any of the meetings or read the documents, and he hadn't. But he does receive a lot of emails from other people, so he does have sources of information, and I don't think that he was being facetious in any way. And I do believe that when Newer and Fewer was done, it was done with the best of intentions and with thought and forthrightness. So, okay, other history with right sizing. In your binder, you will find examples of where we worked with the board beginning in 2016. You'll find examples of where we worked with community partners. You know, the conversations that we've had about the enrollment and those type of things. You'll also find that we did talk about, Jeremy, you want to, and these are notes from work sessions we had with the board, where we did talk about closing a two-section middle or elementary and just spreading them across the remaining elementaries and leaving everything else alone. So that was discussed. I also met with Joel Siren after his public comment during the board meeting following our last work session. And his comment was, it's very evident that we do need to close the school. He just wished that we had explained it more. And even though we as a board and myself as a superintendent and the cabinet and the administrative team talked about it, we did not do a good enough job of explaining to our community why it was a bad idea or attempting to do so. And Joel pointed out that if I did that, because he agreed after I'd gone through the numbers that it probably isn't a good idea to do that. So I'm going to attempt to do that right now and correct my shortcoming. One of the main...
Make sure you explain what that option is again. And then
Roger, you got it. The option I'm talking about is they would close one two-section elementary, and the children would be divided up among the remaining elementaries. There would be no change at the middle schools or high schools. So the only people being affected by that would be the individuals at the closed school. And that's the idea. Now, when you look at it, number one, at the work session, the board explained to me that middle schools were off limits. We were not going to close a middle school. I received that directive from the board. Now, the middle schools are bonded, are worth, where the sheet's at, Greg? Oh, here it is. Okay. Sorry. A lot of paper. Sorry about that. Aldo Leopold and Edward Stone are both, their evaluation is right at just under $22 million. If we spread the students across the elementaries, then soon enough the Edward Stone or Aldo Leopold, one of the two, would get to the point where the number of students in that building would not be sufficient to keep that building open. So that would lead to the closure of a just under a $22 million building that was brand new, and we are still paying bonds on that building to the year 2029. The building is not paid off. The board does not wish to close a building while they're still paying for it. We did talk to Piper Jaffrey, Tim Oswald. He does agree with that, and he did state that we're still setting at $24 million on North Hill, Edwardstone, and Aldo. And again, it would be paid off in the year 2029. Now, that's the current financial situation we find ourselves in. It could change if we refinance, try to pay off early, those type of things. If the state of Iowa would re-establish the penny, we may be able to bond differently than we are, but as of right now, we would end up closing one of the middle schools while still paying on it, which is not a good deal. So we have that. The other history, we did also talk, I'm sorry, I have this on silent, it's still buzzing. BLDD did talk about an option, and using Joel's wisdom, it's important that I explain this. BLDD did talk about an option where we would get rid of BHS and we'd create BHS at one of the middle schools. The reason we didn't choose that, and the reason we didn't bring it up, we thought the reasons were obvious, but I'm gonna go ahead because Joel is right. I need to explain things. BHS sits on 40 acres of land. Right now, this building, Edwardstone, is sitting on 13 acres of land. We could not fit the parking lot, the football fields, the baseball fields, the softball field, the track, the football field, and the parking lot. We couldn't do it. We'd have to spend a lot of money buying property. Aldo Leopold sits on 21 acres. However, it is landlocked to the railroad to the back, the church to the west, the houses to the east, and it wouldn't make any sense to try to buy the land across the road, tear out the Aldo Leopold prairie, move stuff across the road. So both of our middle schools were put in a position to where they do not and cannot facilitate a high school. So that's the reason why we did not present the high school option, because it made no sense. And the options that we did pursue, we pursued diligently because they were somewhat rational and had the potential to be successful. I hope that that helps. Now, when I talked to Joel, I also mentioned that I try, not always, but I try very hard to be approachable and make myself available. And anytime anybody listening at home, listening on the recording afterwards, because this is on YouTube now, or anybody here in the audience, if you have an idea and we haven't talked about it, a hybrid, you need to let us know. But we believe that we have ran the legitimate options to ground, and that spreading students across the elementaries and closing a almost a $22 million building is not a good choice, and neither is spending $40 to $60 million on moving a high school. So that pretty much sums up the history. Anybody have anything else they'd like to say on the history?
Comments?
History's in the past.
Well, Pat, you had mentioned that moving the students into the other elementaries would also overcrowd the current elementaries. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I can, and in my weekly board update to you, I mentioned Mrs. Butler, and the comment that she made was, whatever you tell us to do, we'll make it work. That can-do attitude is why she's where she's at and why she's good at what she does. If you told us, today you told us that we're shutting the course, we're starting tomorrow morning, these administrators would be up all night getting ready to do that. So we could do that. There's none of these options that we couldn't do, but which ones make the most sense? Now, our enrollment keeps going down. One of the things about open enrollment is it's an unjust law in that children of poverty, children who are diminished, and children of special needs, i.e. special education children, the other schools don't have to take them. Burlington's special ed count has actually gone up, our enrollment goes down. So we need more special education space than we have now because of our service delivery plan. And folks, the service delivery plan is a document that specifies how many special ed children a teacher can have in their classroom under their care. And those numbers are fairly low, as they should be. So as our special ed needs go up, we don't have classrooms to put them in. You look, they have book rooms, the book rooms go away. They have collaboration rooms. The amount of work that the teacher leaders have put into collaboration, those type of things, those rooms begin to go away. I know I've worked other places where art teachers do roll in a cart, and they do have the clay and the paint and all this stuff on a cart, and they actually teach in the classroom, the general ed classroom, and I've seen it work. And by golly, we can start doing that tomorrow, if that's what we have to do. But we think that our best course of action is to not place us in those positions to where we're jamming everybody into those buildings. The other thing that Joel, and I'm going to invite Joel to come back to our next board meeting on the 17th and ask him to publicly speak again because he did have some great points. One of the things he asked me, he says, Pat, would you do this even if it wasn't right sizing? And I thought about that question, and I thought, yeah, I would. You know, when you think about, can we structure ourselves in a way that enhances the educational process that we have in place to where we can teach transitions, to where we can make things progressive learning, to where we can bring people together into a community and not into neighborhoods. And, you know, we're seeing some success with bringing people together, and I think we can continue to find success in bringing people together and not keeping people separate. And again, like I said, I will invite Joel to come to the next meeting, and he can talk about this as well. Let me see. During the CLEO analysis work session, several people that are in the stands right now were at the CLEO analysis. During the CLEO analysis, they talked about just closing one and spreading apart. So even the community heard this. The August BLDD work session, brainstorming, the board filled out sheets of paper. BLDD led you through the process of prioritizing, and the prioritizing led to the discussion of the pre-K4, 4 pre-K4s, 156, 178, and 1912. It also led to this discussion of 4 pre-K4s, 2 5 through 8s, 1 9 through 12. We also discussed the option of 2 pre-K1s, 2 through 4th, 1 5 6, 1 7 8, and 1 9 12. Again, I apologize for not finding Joel's wisdom sooner, which is explain to people early why an option is not an option. And I take responsibility for that. And that pretty much covers the history, other than the fact that we did hold a staff meeting with BLDD where we gave people the opportunity to hear briefings and then provide feedback at the end. We did follow that up with 3 public meetings scheduled at different times. We provided daycare, tried to do the best we could to make it easy and convenient for people to give us feedback. And we did have per Mr. Bross's directive to me, we did have a survey opened up to our entire staff, and that was open for roughly, Jeremy, what was it, 4 days? 3.5, okay. Less than 4 days, but more than 3. And, you know, we do have those results, and that pretty much takes us to right now.
And that was like 311 respondents, is that right?
Yep.
311, that's what I thought.
Yep, and how many, so a little less than 50% of our staff responded.
Before we get into that, Heather, did you get your question answered?
I just recall at our last meeting, I thought BLDD had, is that correct? Did I say that right?
Yeah, yes, you did.
You had some percentages that I thought was very helpful.
Yep.
That if we closed course and just moved them into the 4 elementaries, it would be, each of them would be on average at 92% capacity, and then our
Yeah.
middle schools would still be in the upper 50s.
Correct.
Yeah, I just
If-
thought that was helpful to
Yeah.
help you.
Yep, and Jeremy's
Big
got some
picture.
BLDD slides and go to the pie graphs. So BLDD did send us some stuff, and you're right, if we spread them across, the middle schools are very much underutilized. The elementaries are packed, and it results in changes of how we can use those facilities, while the middle schools are very, very underutilized.
Thanks, that's what I was looking for.
I would like to say something here.
Go for
I
it.
spent today visiting some schools with my design plans and looking at rooms. And with the elementary buildings, taking away all of the services and the rooms that are currently not regular classrooms, yes, you can fit the proposed class for next year in the building. However, you are giving up so much to do that, and you are not addressing the middle school facility. And I found out today that people were saying, well, book rooms, we don't need book rooms. Well, I found out today that in book rooms, teachers actually have strategizing meetings, I can't think of the correct title, but the reading teachers that move around from place to place, and then they have the teams come in and they do all of their monthly meetings and that. Those are held there. They also have a couple of desks, that's their workroom, these teachers that travel, maybe they have 2 or 3 schools and that kind of thing. So it is not only a resource, but it is also used as a teacher workroom. And the other thing is, we don't want to go backwards. We don't want to diminish services that we're already providing for our kids. And to me, that would be really going backwards.
Thank you, Deb.
Question for you, Mr. Cohen.
Yes, ma'am.
One question that I believe we've addressed, but we probably have not conveyed well to the public, because I know I've asked you questions on this before, and I know Mr. Johnson is probably going to get caught in this one too. Special education services in middle school. If we would have a 5-6 building and a 7-8 building, do we have adequate space and rooms for special education? Because there could be, especially in a certain grade, there could be a bigger influx which might require another teacher or something else. So if you could address how we are still providing enough space and complying with IEP requirements for our special education students so they're not packed on top of each other.
Absolutely, that is a great question. Did you text that or send that to Jeremy?
The options form.
So if you pull options form, he just emailed it to you.
Feedback, PowerPoint, if you go to slide 23. The options form, feedback, if you go to slide number 23.
Yeah, he'll be able to
on that
pull it up.
PowerPoint.
Off the, just because I appreciate everybody that's here tonight, the numbers are great. Jeremy's gonna pull up the utilization comparison chart. With scenario number 1, the high school's 77%, the middle schools are at 78 and 76. So we're still over 20% under capacity with that option. And the elementaries would be at 76, And the other scenario, the high school remains the same, obviously, and the middle school drops to 56%, and the elementary's jumped to 92. And that's right there. So yes, we'd still have 20%. Is that correct?
Well,
Middle school. Correct. We still have 22% of space to use for special ed children to assure that we're meeting their needs.
okay.
Okay,
But-
go ahead.
But my question, just to clarify, is you can have classes be 80% full in regular education classrooms and still be 20% empty, but will there be space set aside if we need more because of, as you've mentioned, we have an influx of special education students? You know, right now, I think in both middle schools, there's primarily a room. Will there be additional space set aside so that we make sure those students are getting what they need and they're not crammed into one room?
Yep, again, great question. What we'll do is turn it over to Corey and both the, now, a 5-6 building is intermediate. Intermediate principal, wherever you are, would you go up, and then at middle principal, go up to the mic, and then I'll turn it over to Corey. Now, this would be a self-correcting problem, because over the 5 to 7 years, as the demographics continue to change, we'll have fewer and fewer kids in the school, and the crowded elementaries would get lighter. But at that same time, the middle school would get to the point where we need to close one, which is what the board had said we will not do. So it would be a self-correcting problem.
And before Corey starts,
Yep.
I visited Aldo today with that very same question in mind. They have currently now they have 7 special ed rooms just at Aldo. And on our proposed plans, there are only 3. And there are some classrooms that might be able to be used. And the other thing is, I noticed that if you look at the proposed classes we need for next year in the 5th and 6th, they've only designated 9 rooms. And for instance, in 5th, we need 11 rooms. In 6th, we need 12 rooms. But as I said, there are some rooms that are not used on the plan that probably would work. But I'm still concerned that with, like Marlis is, that there would not be enough room, and we just need to have a plan for that. Okay, thank you.
So absolutely, there we go. So on the screen behind you is the floor plans that I think this is the option 1, scenario 1 floor plans that show a 5-6 facility and a 7-8 facility, and Jeremy's tried to blow in to Aldo on the bottom left and Edward Stone on the center. There we go. And if you go over to the Aldo side, there we go. So again, these are assumptions based on current practice and just kind of what it could look like. So you'll notice on the first floor, which is the, well, all right, so maybe, there we go. So we're up here on the Aldo. You'll notice the top is the first floor, this is second floor, this is third floor. The current special ed suite on the first floor that's there in green, that remains a special ed suite. We also have a special ed classroom on the second floor here. And what we have on each floor are the smaller classrooms that are labeled intervention on here. They could be intervention or special education. I think some of those are currently special ed rooms. Mrs. Hatton's shaking her head yes. And you'll also notice that some of these classrooms are labeled on each level. There's a shared flex space that's labeled. That's really a flexible classroom. So what that flexible classroom becomes is our place where, there we go, are those places not really, are places where we can absorb bumper crops, if you will.
Shared flex rooms have risers.
Currently. We have been doing some plans and research on removing those and making those
I talked to
regular
one of the
classrooms.
maintenance guys, and he said that's cement under there, and he thought perhaps that was a problem. So, I'm just, you know.
Nope, we've had those conversations, and I know Tim's done some research. But we have we have the smaller classrooms that can either be intervention or special ed. We have dedicated special ed places.
Hey,
where it
Corey, can
currently
we
is.
hold up for a second? Because we need to make sure we put that to bed.
Yes.
Let's not move on. Tim,
Yes, sir.
she just said that she talked to some maintenance guys and they said something's a myth. Could you, Mrs. Hadberg?
Well, it was, they said there was cement underneath there, that'd be a really difficult process to remove. I've just passed
One
it
of the
on.
things that makes the rooms with the risers difficult is the ductwork runs through the floor. I believe it has a concrete base to it with a wooden tier,
Okay.
but the ductwork runs through it, and we're not sure about what's finished below.
But much like Mrs. Butler said, we can get it done.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So can you.
Yeah.
yeah.
If it needs to be done, we can do it.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to bring up the point, because I know people,
And that's a very good point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So in general here, what I want to point out is that when we have these shared spaces, which are currently where the risers are, and we've had those conversations, those are places where we can absorb classes. So if we need a 9th or 10th or 11th
That's right,
section,
yes.
but we can also use those as special ed spaces if needed. We have the special ed suites and those smaller classrooms as well. So there really shouldn't be much of a decline from what they currently have.
Would that be a big cost issue, getting that done, Tim?
It could be.
Would that be a lot of money to get that done?
It could be. It depends upon how hard it's going to be to reroute the ductwork. If we got to run it across the top of the ceiling and put diffusers in, we might be able to install similar diffusers, kind of like what we have here, like what's in the rest of the classrooms there. If we could do that, it would be probably a lot cheaper to do that than run it up and across up above the ceiling.
Hey, Mr. Kesterkey,
Yes, sir.
you're saying could be a lot, might be this, that. Give us a dollar amount, please.
I did some rough numbers, I believe, for Mrs. Butler, and my rough numbers were around $35,000 to $45,000 per room, not knowing, because when you get down, we don't know if the drywall's finished below the top tier, or even if there's drywall there. I'm sure there's no VCT on the concrete, so we're going to have to blend that. We might have to pull the rest and put in new to make sure the room is all uniform. There was just some what-ifs there, and I kind of budgeted what I felt like was for all that.
As a frame of reference, what you paid last year to redo the maker spaces?
It depends. North Hill was probably the most expensive because we needed to add steps, and I think it was close to about 11 grand. And that didn't count the furniture.
And
I
what
wasn't
fund
involved
would
with-
that, what fund would those funds come out of to pay for that work?
Probably PEPAL or 1 cent sales tax.
All of these costs are one-time costs. That
Right.
would be paid for either through sales tax or PEPAL.
So not the general fund?
right. And we would also have family consumer science room and the shop room.
The shop room, correct.
That could be utilized also. as
Correct.
spaces. In the 6th grade anyway, I'm talking. 5th and
Correct.
6th. Yeah.
In your annual budget, what's 45? What percentage of your annual budget?
I'm sorry,
45,000 is what of your annual budget? Greg?
about,
Yeah, we took out of, it's maybe 2% between the combined
that's,
funds.
I was going to say 5, but
And like a true high-quality maintenance guy, you're guessing high. I appreciate
I try to, yeah.
it. Keeps us safe.
I'd rather project it high, come in low
Right.
than,
And I am not, Mr. Kesterkey, I am not saying that $45,000 is chump change. I am not saying that. I understand this is from our taxpayers.
correct.
But I am saying in your budget, we're talking about 2% that you might be able to squeeze someplace else where you don't even do something and we break even.
Yeah, that is correct.
So just to kind of wrap that up, I don't know if you guys think you got your question answered.
I just have one more thing
Okay,
that
go
I
ahead.
thought was interesting, that we had allotted at the elementary for special ed, we had allotted, I think, was 15 rooms, and we had like autism rooms, we had hearing impaired rooms and that kind of thing, and then when we got to the middle school, it was way reduced. And I just, you know, it was just a question in my mind, what happens to those kids? Because obviously they still need the same services that they needed in the elementary. And so I just want to make sure that we're keeping all of that in part of the picture. I mean, I'm not trying to sabotage anything, it's just that
I guess that's where I want to take off from where you're at, and maybe have Mr. Craddock and Ms. Butler address that particular question. Can we provide the services in the middle schools, I guess, under option one at the 5, 6, and 7, 8? Do we have enough room, even if we have to make some adjustments?
Right, so looking at Edstone as a building, I've taken and kind of mapped out the house system, and I can make the house system work without touching any of the current special ed rooms, and I have at least 2 additional rooms that I can add to that if I need to. So I feel confident that we have room at Edstone to make that work without affecting the quality of services provided to students.
I would echo that, and as Mrs. Hatterberg also said, in a 5-6 building, there are extra spaces that would not be utilized in the same way that they would be in the 7-8 buildings, such as the family consumer science and the industrial tech rooms that are going to be kind of flexible spaces to be used. There's a smaller room attached to the industrial tech room that could be utilized. But just in looking at the map there, you know, I feel very confident that the space is there that is necessary.
it was just that what we saw was not what was happening, you know, currently.
Right.
Yeah,
Did you have any other questions, Deb, at this
I
time?
didn't, thank you. Thank you,
Marlis,
everybody.
Deb, it kind of started with your question. Did you get your question answered?
I was going to say, between Deb and I think we've, she was
I
more
have more
thorough.
time than Marlis does.
She was more thorough on it, but I think our point was made, so.
I just wanted to clarify, Brian, the 1A is the plan, that is, the one elementary is 5, 6, and then the second one is 7, 8.
No,
Isn't that
that's,
correct?
no, 1A is the 2 5 through 8s.
Is it?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
I'm confused, sorry.
Yeah, 1A is the, kind of changes
Two
the
with same-
the middle
okay.
school
So
part of it.
1 has the 5, 6.
Distinct.
Thank
That's
you.
correct.
Thank you.
Right.
That helps, I got confused.
One question I think about in this process, you know, we're making a big move now, and looking at the demographics, there are going to have to be other changes as time goes by. As we put these plans together, do all of these give us the options then to make moves farther down the road than what we have to do now?
I think it's a good question, Dean.
In the right-sizing binder, we talk about phase 2 in or around 2025, and it's outlined in there that, yes, it does give us options. Now, again, the option is another elementary, and that's based upon not wanting to close the, let me put my glasses on here, not wanting to close the $22 million building.
And I'm looking at the demographics, and if those trends go, other things are going to have to happen over time.
Correct.
That's the bad news, but I think possibly, I'd like to have the other problem where we have more kids.
I would also.
We'd all like to have that problem.
But you
and
still have to.
Maybe that'll happen.
Still have to prepare, you know.
But I don't think we
You
can
look for
plan.
the best and prepare for the worst.
Right, and I think that's what we're doing, preparing for the worst, and that's why we're having these discussions. But we can't plan on a hope and a prayer.
Oh, no.
We have to plan on.
But I just don't want us painting ourselves in a corner, as I've said many times.
Sure.
Right, and to your point, which is a very good point, thank you, by not selling or tearing down course, repurposing it, we still maintain ownership. Now, the amount of money, because we're not really saving money, we're just spending it differently, which then allows us to do things differently because we're not allocating funds in the way that we currently are, which is inefficient. If all of a sudden we did, we could begin to move back into course. So we're not burning the fort as we leave it. It is still in our back pocket, so to speak.
Okay, one question tied to that as we put these configurations together. What's the anticipation for JMAC? Where will that go? And I know we've talked about all kinds of places for it.
Yes, James Madison, so I don't confuse people in the stands or those listening at home, James Madison, the building, we hope to tear down, use it for housing development, and build some valuation into our community and cater to families, hopefully. James Madison Education Center, the program for the students that are from the high school would be at course.
Thank you.
And Mr. Kesterkey has completely mapped out course, and he has assigned everything a location.
And Head Start is going there also?
Correct.
Okay, and
And Head Start HQ as well.
And the bakery.
Now, with not possibly, and we are working at the bakery, all those things, Tim's got it all mapped out. By not distributing all the kids across course and leaving everything else alone, we have spoke with Head Start about having a Head Start preschools co-locate with our elementaries.
that's what I was going to ask about.
And then we can provide all-day, everyday preschool. So we diminish our noon routes, so there's less busing, and the parent who has to go to work now can work all day, and their child is taken care of all day. We can't do that if we're at 93% full.
How many classrooms are there in the Head Start, do you know offhand?
I don't, Tim should.
Yes.
And Mr. Johnson, you have the numbers on empty rooms, correct? With the pre-K 4s? Okay, you can go after him, that way they can talk.
I believe they have 11 or 12 rooms right now, James Madison.
So would it be a possibility we might even just take some of them into the existing buildings and then the rest of them go to course or something like that?
That is correct.
Okay.
And of those 11 rooms, not all of them are full of kids. Because one's a lunchroom, a couple of them are offices.
Office spaces.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't phrase my question correctly then. I wondered how many classrooms of children. That's what I was asking.
I think they got about 9 or 10.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Yep.
Pat, I want to clarify something. I get spending money differently, but I think you're saying we're not saving money, but I think we probably are.
We are.
And spending it differently. For example, if we close JMAC, move that to course, close course, I mean, some of the staff are going to relocate. We're probably going to lose some staff or have some issues with that, and that's regrettable. But we're still going to be spending some money at course, but not nearly what we were. So there is a savings there, and what's left we're going to be spending differently. Is that a correct way of saying that?
Yes, every year when we age our salary schedule, we finish the negotiations process. I believe last year was 800,000. Is that correct, Greg? Yes. So 800,000. The state is woefully underfunding education currently, and this gives us a chance to do things differently because now we're not spending that money running a school that's only 60% full, so we can look at other things.
Right. Okay.
Questions, comments?
And if I could just make a few comments regarding, some of the discussions earlier, the previous boards with the newer and fewer, I think they made, great decisions with the information they had at the time, looking at the time frame. And as we talked about with our community workshops, a lot has changed within our district in just a very short period of time. In 2012, just 6 short years ago, we were serving over 4,100 students in our building. We're currently at just under 3,400. So in 6 short years, we're serving 700 fewer kids than we were just 6 years ago. That's a big change in a short period of time. That's obviously, when you just look at enrollments in a building, that's easily a building. So unfortunately, that's the problems that we have to work with given our enrollment trends. The projections, again, unfortunately, the state's projecting we will continue to lose 75 students a year for the foreseeable future. So that's, when we look at planning forward in what we need to do, we try and keep those things in mind also. When we look at, like you say, are we saving money doing these things? When we look at the feedback in the forums, people, with the building alignments, they're saying, well, some of them say, well, just, do nothing. Well, the reality is doing nothing doesn't mean we're doing nothing. We will still be making changes. our recommendations to the board are what we think are the best utilization of our buildings and our funds that we have available. So doing nothing isn't an option. There will still be changes that need to be made. As Superintendent Cohen mentioned, our costs typically go up about $800,000 a year just through negotiated salaries and benefits. In our new money or regular program revenues next year, and for the next 5 years, will be negative. Next year, it's about $700,000, just because of the large number of enrollment decline. So, doing nothing doesn't mean doing nothing, even if we didn't do the building realignment. So we would still be bringing recommendations to the board for changes. This just happens to be the ones that we think make the most sense given the circumstances.
We've had changes. In line with that, how much of the savings is cuts in staff?
When we looked at, closing an elementary building, 700,000 of that is, we had $1 million total savings, but a little over 700,000 of that is staff savings.
So almost 3/4 of that we save is just from laying off staff.
And that's really kind of in line when you look at our costs. Almost 80% of our costs are staff. So,
but you said laying off staff, but I think we've talked about that a lot of that's through attrition.
that's what we hope. So,
Yeah.
Well, it's staff, but we don't have it.
Exactly.
That is correct.
Wherever they go.
Even if we do nothing, we're laying off staff. We're cutting programs. We're,
Right.
those type of things.
I was gonna say.
And we've cut programs and we've cut things every year so
Right.
far that I've been on the board.
Correct.
That's one point I'd like to make to the public, because a lot of times I'm getting you're looking only at the bottom dollar. To me, a huge point is that we have made cuts. I've been on the board for 7 years. We have made cuts every year but one that I have been on the board. And I know we keep saying there's no more low-hanging fruit, there's no more, so if we don't do this, we are going to be cutting programs to our students, and it's not just a little bit here and there. There are going to have to be some massive program cuts and some services we aren't going to be able to offer. So when people say you're just doing this about the bottom dollar, no, I'm not, because we're trying to do what's best educationally for our students, and that's one thing that I want the public to understand. This isn't about us balancing on a spreadsheet to get to the right number. This is about, this is what we are allocated. How can we most effectively use what we have to educate our students? So I want to make sure the public understands we're not just pushing numbers around for no reason. We see no more easy cuts that don't severely affect our students.
And to that point, this is off script, but I think it's appropriate. Mr. Kane's here, I believe. Mr. Kane, would you walk up to the podium deal, please? To Ms. Roberts' point, changing, we were reviewing numbers on trimesters. And because we changed, we stopped doing what we'd done for a long time. We did something different. And I believe that right now the numbers are very positive. Is that correct?
Yeah, I wish I would have brought my computer. Yeah,
That's okay. Ladies and gentlemen, he's guessing because I'm putting him on the spot.
So after our first trimester, I think we had 91 total failures for freshmen, 53 students, and only 34 failures in the core. And a number of the students that
Hey, Mr. Kane, so if you had 30, let's put a positive twist on this. So the number of people that passed that didn't used to has increased by what?
Oh, we had, I was just going to get to that.
Oh, I understand, but.
So we had, like I said, we had 34 failures in the core. We had 34 failures in one core class 2 years ago, just to put some perspective to it. Our ninth grade team right now is doing an outstanding job. I mean, they're making it very, very difficult to fail. The kids that have failed, generally it's because of attendance. That, to be real honest with you, that's our biggest issue right now is Our ninth grade team can't work miracles with kids when they're not in the room with them to sprinkle their dust on them. So the trimester system right now, we're seeing some good success with that. But again, it's not just the trimester change, the freshman academy that we've put in place, some of the summer school things that we've done to build relationships with some of these kids. I mean, there's a lot of factors, but I was tickled to death that I had to brag to Mr. Cohen, but I'll be giving the board the actual data on that compared to last year's trimesters. We're far beyond even where we were last year, and we had a pretty good improvement from the previous year when we were on the semester schedule. And again, it doesn't all have to do with trimesters, but that definitely is a factor.
Yeah, and as he said, a lot of it is with his teachers. Now, for people that are at home and are not familiar with Burlington schools like many of our faculty is, and again, simple math, I said about 250 kids per class, times 6 trimesters, about 1,500 times 3 trimesters, so about 4,500 grades assigned at the high school a year. Correct. So when he talks about 35 failing, do the math. That is a very small percentage. So if you're sitting at home and he said 35, and your kid goes to Notre Dame, there's only 6 kids in his class, and you think, oh my gosh, 35. We're talking 35 out of 4,500 classes that were taken. And that doesn't include summer school, and that doesn't include 0 hour. So that, and again, that's a swag at the math. So if you're writing it down, like I'm speaking gospel right now, I am not.
So there's some good things happening.
Some
at the
great
Burlington
things happening
Community School District.
because we're willing to change.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And again, I just can't, I'm going to speak to that freshman group of teachers again because they're putting in a lot of extra time, and they're just doing an outstanding job, and it's gonna matter. I mean, that 9th grade year is crucial, and you can look at any research article you want. To have the type of success that our kids are having right now in their 9th grade because of those 9th grade teachers is huge. It's going to pay huge dividends to us in the long haul. So,
Thank you, Mr. Kane. Mr. Kendall, do you have a question?
No, not necessarily. It's been said, but I'm glad Ms. Roberts made the point about the bottom line in the dollar is not what's driving necessarily this. If it was, we might cancel orchestra, we might cancel band and keep all the staff employed and everything going the way it is, and that probably is not actually the best option for students. We were trying to find the balance of the best option for the students and the most efficient use of our facilities, and towards that end, the public tends to make fun of government when they're inefficient. We're trying to be more efficient. We're trying to be more responsible with the dollars that we have, and so we're trying to do the best that we can with that. We're not trying to keep the status quo or keep going down a road that leads us to greater inefficiency. So it's not necessarily the dollar. If it was the dollar, we probably wouldn't be having a whole lot of discussion except what extracurriculars we're going to cut. So it's really about how we can best provide services to the students and take care of our staff at the same time. I can't stress that enough. If you look at the documents, you look at the funding, and you listen to what Mr. Reynolds is saying about what we get from the state, we're not just looking at the bottom dollar. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Kendall.
If I could just say something I probably should have said earlier. Since last Monday's meeting, I did a posting on Facebook to ask people to come to this meeting. Some said that I had an ulterior motive, that I wanted one plan over another. I actually don't. I really don't have a plan in mind. But I did think that the audience, that the people of this town should be here and hear the discussion. I'm disappointed that there aren't more. In a city this size, this room should be full, and I'm disappointed that they're not. The other thing that I wanted to say was I believe, and I believe from the beginning, that we still should be trying to figure out, I know open enrollment isn't all of this, but open enrollment's an elementary building. We should be trying to figure out why we're losing students. As we just heard at the high school, we have wonderful programs. And I want to know why we're losing kids to Danville, West Burlington, and other places. I just think we need to know that, and in fact, that's what Mr. Miller talked about in the paper even, that maybe we ought to be doing that. I don't know why we're not doing that, but I've suggested it and heard nothing else. This board will not know why we're losing kids if we don't start getting the public involved. I'm not saying that because there's an audience here. I'm saying it because it's true.
I appreciate Mr. Courtney,
Thank
and
you.
you know we've had surveys done, you know we've done other things, and I don't think we necessarily have all of that information. We've had independent surveys, so we do know, and I think we're working on those things. So I guess I would say, and you've been on the board less recently than I have, but I do know that we have some understanding of that, but we have to change those perspectives, and we have to get out the good news, and we have to have people at our meetings so they can hear about what's going on.
But I don't think we've asked people why they think kids are open and rolling out. I don't think we've asked our staff that.
Okay.
I don't think we've asked the public that.
We'll probably take it offline because this is not really in
I
this work
understand
session,
that.
but yeah, we need to talk about that. So I think we're probably ready to jump into the transportation.
Can I ask just one more question?
Go for it.
Because I want to thank the people that have reached out to us.
Yes.
And I've had quite a few emails this week in comparison to previous weeks. One question that parents are concerned about is how will the 5th, 6th day look? I understand that there are going to be a few transitions, that you're going to have a few teachers, but are the kids going to have a homeroom teacher that they start the day in and end the day in? And I was just wondering if somebody could speak to that to maybe to give the public a little more information.
Well, let me start by saying there is nothing that's perfected right now. There are lots of thoughts and ideas. Having said that, the goal will be, Mr. Cohen stated earlier, this is not a middle school. A 5-6 building would be an intermediate school building that would look very different from a middle school building. So let me say that up front. So the beginning plans would be to kind of run with a block schedule, meaning that kids would see, so we would have the house system. You know, if I'm a kid on the first floor, that's my house. I stay on the first floor. I don't go to the second floor because that's the second floor house. I don't go to the third floor because that's the third floor house. My house is the first floor. That becomes my family. In that, there will be a mix of 5th and 6th graders. They would be in separate classrooms, but the 5th, 6th grade house would be that group there, that family. So in a block system, so it may be that I go to a teacher and I have a 90-minute block that is my math science block. So that teacher for that day is able to take that 90 minutes and manipulate it around to meet the needs and the standards that would fit whatever he or she is teaching that day for math and or science. So if I need extra time as a teacher for a math lesson that day, I have the flexibility to do so. Or if I'm starting to integrate those two things in my math and science opportunity for learning that day, I can do so. So maybe that 90 minutes is touching on all of the math standards and science standards that I want today that we've integrated them. So then the next block could be the language block. My literature, language, writing is all done, same 90-minute block. So, you know, what we want to do is ease the transitions so it's not, you know, 6, 7, 8 teachers a day that a student's seeing. It's 3 or 4 that a student is seeing. Maybe 5 depending on what the special schedule is. So still going to art, to PE, to music, and then also having a hound time, an intervention time that could also be utilized as a house time, or maybe breaking into smaller family-sized groups and doing planning, working on social skills lessons, socio-emotional learning, just a pretty flexible time to go along with the intervention time that might be, you know, used for a reading intervention or a math intervention, but also that opportunity for the group time as well.
So for 5th graders, it really wouldn't be all that much different than maybe some of the schools where the fifth grade teachers do teach a subject and all the classes, like they have 3 sections, they rotate through that same teacher and that sort of thing.
Correct.
So, I mean, it would not be that much different maybe for them.
Correct.
Other than maybe they wouldn't have their own desk, they'd be using a locker more as a desk, but.
Yep.
but-
So as a fifth grade teacher myself, I was in buildings where there were 4 fifth grade sections and kids saw 4 teachers for the day. Those would be the core teachers. If you count their specialist teacher, that's 5 teachers. So, I mean, obviously, we have 3 buildings that are pretty much 2-section buildings, so we're not doing that to, right now. But our kids, our fifth grade students have definitely at times had that really same type of learning environment.
And it worked very successfully.
Absolutely.
Anyway, in the buildings that I've been in.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Shall we move on to transportation?
Hearing no objection to moving on, Mr. Mahaffey, you are up. And before he starts, I greatly appreciate your willingness to sit down and hash through and help us get most of what we're looking for. I appreciate that a great deal.
Well, if we're looking at the option as far as transportation, under option 1 currently, we feel with transportation, look at the numbers, if all 359 students that become eligible ride, we can fit them on the bus, on the routing system that we're currently using. Now, if all 359 ride, then we might have to add another bus. But 100% ridership doesn't happen. That just doesn't happen. 80% is a phenomenal number. 70% would probably be closer. And the reason we feel we can fit those is because we're switching from elementary, where we're taking the K through 4, pre-K through 4, into the out of the elementaries, or into the elementaries, going to 4 buildings. We're taking the 5th grade and putting them in, and this is option 1, 5th and 6th grade buildings, or 5th and 6th grade building, and then a 7th and 8th grade building. That would be a majority. All 359 students then would qualify for busing. We know that 359 are not going to ride. We can take those students then, and rather than having, we have 17 regular ed routes right now, or regular ed buses right now. We could take those, and it'd be switching from elementary. We'd have to take probably 3 or 4 elementary buses, make them middle school buses. It's simple, and it would work. Yes?
Question for you. For busing purposes, and I'm not saying that a decision has been made or that administration wouldn't have a little something to say about this, but for busing purposes on school start times, under 1A, current school start times would work, correct? Because it's basic, that's when you have the 2 5-8 buildings. So that'd be similar to NET. Under just option 1, for busing purposes, would 5-6 need a different start time than 7-8?
No.
Okay.
We could actually, start times, we could actually basically be the high school, and Aldo Leopold and Edward Stone currently start at 8 o'clock. We could keep that.
Okay.
North Hill and Grimes, 8:30. Sunnyside and Blackhawk, 8:45.
So Alan, I want to kind of tag on to what Marlis is asking, but
Sure.
I'm going to ask it in a different way. I'm going to pretend I'm a parent, a single parent, with a 4th grader, a 6th grader, and an 8th grader. How do I get my kids to school on time?
How do you get your kids to school on time?
Because I'm going to have them in 3 different buildings.
Well, we've got, if you're going to have a 4th grader and a 6th grader.
And an 8th grader.
And an 8th grader, you've got them starting at 8 o'clock. You'll have to start like we are in busing. We don't start, the buses will show up at Aldo Leopold or Edward Stone at 7:30.
But my point is under the scenario that I think you just mentioned, that Aldo and James Madison would start at the same time. But they're on opposite ends of town. Edstone, I mean.
Right, they are on opposite ends of town. So those buses would serve, there'd be buses that, like we do now, buses that serve Edward Stone, There are buses that serve all the
So
way.
one of my kids would ride the bus and the other two I might take. Is that what you're thinking, or?
I'll interject.
I'm just throwing out a hypothetical that
Yeah.
frankly meets a lot of the questions I've got.
It does, and we've made this decision that if one child rides, the whole family rides.
Okay.
Now, the other thing, to your point, let's say the mom wants to haul for whatever reason, that's great. Any principal over there not have people drop kids off early now? So they could drop their kid off on this side of town, drive to the other side of town, and have both kids to school early. The current practice is people do pull up, they do drop off a kid, and they go to the other school.
But if they're in a bus, how's that work?
Just as Alan explained it. That doesn't change anything. If they're on the bus, they get dropped off just like he explained, but if the parent wanted to drive their child, they could hit all three.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Marlis?
Yes, because I know a lot of our parents are concerned, but in thinking back under the current system, for instance, when my son was at Aldo and I had to be in court in Mount Pleasant, there were times I dropped him off maybe 10 to 15 minutes early, and while I don't know that there were an actual formal supervisors out there, there would be some sort of administrator or staff person out there monitoring when I dropped him off,
Right.
so.
And that's every school in the state of Iowa. That's not just Burlington. Every school in the state of Iowa, parents have to drop their kid off a little early and get to work or get to an appointment.
Just to kind of answer Pat's question, we start school supervision about a half hour before that first bell rings. So I have staff come in at 8:15, so that's when I just recommend parents if they want to drop their kids off. So about a half hour before we start, kids start coming in, or we have supervision in place. There are times where a parent comes in at 8 o'clock and says, hey, Chris, can you take my kid in because I got to get somewhere? Yes, we do that. But majority, we try and say about a half hour before that first bell rings, and we put supervision in place to help watch the kids. And that's at all the schools.
Right, but to that point, I've also gotten calls before from an upset mom because it was 42 degrees and she thought it was too cold for them to wait and stand outside. You know what I mean? So you have to explain to people, dress appropriately. 42 degrees is not too cold to stand outside, you know, and some of those type of things. So as board members and as administrators, some people will still complain, even though people like Chris Richards are letting people come in early and trying their best. But for the most part, it happens every day, and it's no big deal.
All of your buildings basically do serve breakfast. And I can't speak as to what time you start breakfast, but Sunnyside, Blackhawk, Sunnyside starts at 8 o'clock. Blackhawk probably the same? Breakfast? 8:20. Yeah, 8:20. North Hill and Grimes, I'm sure, are different as well. 8 o'clock, okay. So we do, there are people there. Middle schools, 7:35.
Alan, do we have enough bus drivers?
Under this system?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
We have enough buses.
Yes, we do. Under this system, yes. Currently, we run 17 regular ed routes. Now, those routes, I should say 17 regular ed buses. Those routes, those buses will run 2 times, okay? Now, what you'll do, if you take those and try to put them through all at one time to get the same time, you're looking at 28, okay? Then we don't. But under the current system we use now, yes.
So what you're saying, current system, within that talk that we had before about the bus hub that at the high school, that's not an issue anymore. That's not a thing. Is that right?
Not an issue? Well,
No,
it's not, it's not in the mix right now.
It's not in the mix.
Right.
Okay.
The current discussion based upon, you know, all the changes, those types of things, we didn't think at this point in time, it made sense to throw a hub into consideration and given some of Alan's, you know, comments and thoughts, concerns. But when we look at, you know, options 1 and 1A, as he mentioned, yeah, we may have to add 350 kids, potential eligible riders. Now, obviously, not all those will ride, but with the existing route structure that we have with the 2 tiers, you know, we show 17 routes, but a lot of those are 2-tiered routes. Right. The way we currently operate, they'll run an elementary route and a secondary route. So We could easily fit the 359. When we looked at it, we thought we may have to add 10 kids on a bus, and we have, you know, adequate capacity the way we're structured now with those routes that we feel we could put 10 kids on a bus without any trouble. So we do have, under option one, we thought worst case scenario, we may have to add one route. So again, we feel we can accommodate either options 1 and 1A with the route structure that we have in place now.
Would anything, or maybe you're going to get to this, would anything have to be added or subtracted if we went with, I think we're calling it option 3, the closing course, dividing the students, and nothing else?
Well, you've got 204 kids, 204 students there at course that become eligible, basically, to go out to the buildings. That's the same thing that's the same thing you're seeing. But now wait a second, because if you're talking 5th and 6th, and if this 5th and 6th grade building.
Nothing else, that option 3, if I understand it, is just closing course, dividing the students, leaving the middle schools as is.
Well, yeah, we could fit those. We could fit those
So
on existing routes.
nothing changes, and nothing added, nothing
For
subtracted?
transportation, no.
Okay.
Okay, I've got a question.
But it would continue running back and forth between the middle schools.
Yeah. But it doesn't
I get that,
change-
I just
right.
wanted to, I know somebody's going to ask me that question, so just throwing it out.
So Alan, are we planning on just dividing the course district or area up and just sending them to 4 schools? Have we talked about how we're going to distribute those course students?
We have kind of a diagram in the book.
And
there,
I
which
saw
is-
that.
Yeah.
And is that basically how that's going to be
Yes.
done then? So
Yes.
I can't remember, were they going to the 4 schools?
Yes. Blackhawk, North Hill, Grimes, and Sunnyside.
Okay.
Yes.
We have the document here about how much it would cost on the worst-case scenario of having to add a route. Could you just mention that in the meeting for folks who haven't seen it, what it would cost if we did have to add a route?
If we had to add a route, it's an additional, it'd be $25,000 per bus. We kind of have it figured up to the cost. Every time you have to add a bus, it's going to be $25,000. Now, that's not including the cost of the bus. That is because we wouldn't have to buy another bus. We have a bus that we could put in that mix. But your fuel, your mileage, all that stuff that we have to put on our on our forms at the end of the school year, it figures up to around $25,000.
Does that count the driver as well?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Easier number might be $400 a student.
How many extra buses do we have? Several?
We actually have, if you're including our activity buses, 9.
9?
3 activity buses, but you don't want to put those, you don't want to count them because you want to still run your activities. Now, we also have, we have 3 handicap buses. Those buses have lifts on those. Now, we keep those because when it's weather like this and it's cold, the first one to go is the handicap bus because your lifts don't work or they get cold. So we keep them inside. We try to think ahead. The buses that are running currently on the routes and we also have a 65 passenger, a couple old ones that we could use as well. They've all passed inspection. They're all roadworthy. But in any case, when you need to throw a bus like we had last year, we had 4 buses start gelling up. Mechanics started pulling them in, starting them again, and basically we'd have the bus pull in, we'd drive the driver in another bus in a matter of minutes. We didn't lose any time. It's nice to have that those extra buses. Oh, sure. Sorry.
Ms. Hatterberg, you asked about the districting. I just wanted to clarify that real quick. What you had in your packet is kind of is an estimate right now, kind of a best guess, an example. In terms of actual numbers and where they go, obviously one of the things we're trying to do in all this is equalize class sizes across the buildings, right? And utilize our classroom spaces the best we can. So once we know which scenario the board chooses to go with, then we can put real numbers to the scenario, look exactly who we have. I know Alan's got a couple scenarios in his sandbox in the transportation system. It may not be that core students are divided equally over all 4 buildings. It may be that they're loaded more heavily to 1 or 2 buildings. But again, that's the intent in that is to equalize the class sizes so that we don't have, again, 1 or 2 buildings where we've got huge class sizes and 1 or 2 where we don't. So it's not that, the example, I just want to clarify, the example that's in the binder is an example. It's for illustrative purposes right now. Once we have, you know, it could flex a little bit. It might not be equally between all 4.
But no student that is currently attending one of the 4 buildings would have to move.
Currently, that's not the plan. No, currently the plan is that they stay where they are, and the only attendance boundaries that get changed are those that are currently course attendance boundaries get divided between the remaining 4 in some way that helps equalize class sizes.
Right, yeah.
Yep.
I just wanted to clarify that because I know that's a concern of.
Okay, no, absolutely, I understand that too. I just wanted to clarify and make sure we're on the same page. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments on transportation? All right, let's move on then to the staff survey results. Thank you, Mr. Mahaffey.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And he did find a way to keep all our kids at their, no, I don't need you, I was just praising you.
Okay.
All right? I need you, but just not right now. Thank you. He did find a way for us to keep children at their school through the academic year and knock down that 60% turnover rate in classrooms, which will help bring stability to the children's lives. So thank you for that, Al.
That's significant. Thank you.
All right, up to the right sizing survey. I appreciate the, Jeremy, he jumped right on it that night to try to put some things together. I appreciate you putting that together. We had some requests, the public comment. So, I mean, I'm curious to see well, I kind of saw the results, but go ahead and share what you found.
Sure. As Mr. Bross mentioned, did ask me to put together a survey. I believe it was last Tuesday, Wednesday. So we got that put together fairly quickly with the cabinet. So just want to go ahead and go through some of the results from that survey. First off, we wanted to start with just kind of understanding where our respondents were coming from, what part of the district. I did in the 2 sections on the right, made a change halfway through the survey to kind of add the nurses into the equation so they knew where they were going. So those 2 sections combined are about 61.1%, which is all of our certified staff. And then the next largest section would be 25.1%, which is our secretaries, associates, and clerks. And then we have other parts of the district that just because of their sheer lack of size in terms of population, they're not going to show up very heavily within the survey results in terms of departments. Next, we wanted to understand exactly where our respondents were coming from. We surely anticipated that a large portion, excuse me, of our respondents would come from the elementary section. But again, there's a pretty even split just amongst the staff, where they are in the buildings within the district. So we kind of, again, we're about where we expected to be. Next question we wanted to ask was, did everyone attend the right sizing survey in terms of what information were they providing? Were they truly educated? And what we got when we looked at the numbers, breaking it down at 33.88% that responded to the survey were right in line with the number of people number of staff that we had attend our right sizing sessions. So we know that those people, not only did they come out, but they also provided their feedback here in this survey, but then we still had a significant number of staff that wanted us to have their feedback either way. Next question was, have you reviewed the board session packet? Thought that was really important. We put all that information out there in advance of the survey just to make all of that information available. Again, wanted to make sure that the people that were responding to the survey were well informed of the information that was out there and the decisions that were being made and why. Now, next we're going to dig into a little bit of the information that we got from staff, relative to the decisions that the board needs to make. As you see here, our 2 closest options, our 2 top options are 43.7% for option number 1, which is our 4 pre-K 4 buildings, and our 5-6 intermediate 7-8 middle school. And then 41.5, which was an option that was actually added at the last board meeting in terms of maintaining the current structure that we have in place and just taking the students from course and moving them throughout the district to the other remaining elementary schools. And then going through some of the other options, and I don't have the percentages that are showing up, right there, but they're right around, I believe, 15-20%, somewhere in that area. Don't quote me because I can't see those numbers right in front of me. But again, those other options, option 2, option 1A, were all about equally spread out throughout the respondents. Next, I wanted to just kind of go in and break down a little bit of the information that we had available. Like Mr. Courtney said, there were 311 responses. That was out of 704 current staff members, which is 44.18 overall response rate. When you're looking at surveys in general, you can, where we were was about midway from, what would be considered low participation versus what would be considered high participation. So I think that is a pretty good representation of our staff in terms of the feedback that we're getting. Specifically breaking down, some of the staff, we had 317 total certified staff in the district. Out of that group, there were 190 certified responses, which was a 63% response rate of the total survey, and then 61.1% of the staff that actually provided their feedback. So again, a pretty high number of staff that we did have to provide their feedback. Also wanted to again just show the number of associates, clerical, and clerks at 78 people, which, like we said before, was 25.1% of the responses. On the right-hand side, you'll see the selections, both percentage-wise and number of individuals-wise. I know we talked about the percentages, but then breaking that down into actually how many people voted for those different options. And I'll just kind of let everyone take a look at that pretty quickly. And then at the bottom, again, we've broken down the certified staff and what their options, what their selections were. And there was a little bit of a flip when you look at the responses. The all staff recommendation was about 43 to 41, with option 1 being the highest. On the certified selections, it was flipped about 43 to 41, with option 3 being the number 1 option out of certified staff. Just wanted to put a little bit of a different spin on the information, go dig a little bit more into the details of the options that were presented, because there are some overlap within those options. When we look at the choices and where there were pre-K 4 building options, there was about 49.2% of staff chose an option that had that option available. Then when we look at the 5, 6, and the 7, 8 buildings, there was a 47.9% of staff that would recommend those 2 options as well. And again, the spread across the district option was 43.2, and there was a 3.2% portion of the staff that said we should do nothing, we should maintain our current overall structure.
And these results have been distributed to the staff?
Yes, they sent those out this morning. The survey was open from 4 p.m. on Thursday through 8 o'clock this morning, so got the results compilated and sent those out to staff shortly before the meeting started. Obviously have received some questions about specific numbers. Hopefully we provided some of that information here today, but also want to get that information out so staff has, they can understand exactly who said what, where.
Questions, comments, board?
Thank you. I really think it was something that we needed to do, and I really appreciate the extra effort that all of you did to accomplish that.
Well, I think it's good that we gave the staff a chance to respond. Absolutely. I think it's interesting that they're about evenly divided on two scenarios.
Any place else we need to go with questions here tonight? This is our work session. We've been at it about an hour and a half.
They may, after, to close out the final portion, which is the survey results, staff, teachers and associates, the public, BLDD, parents, admin, and the community, all have shown through survey that they're in support of the 4 pre-K 4s, the 1, 5, 6, the 1, 7, 8, and the 1, 9, 12.
Which is the scenario 1, right?
Excuse me?
Scenario 1.
Scenario 1.
Correct.
I would encourage the board to continue to receive input. You know, if you have questions that come up, let's get them back to Greg and Pat. And as we approach our regular board meeting on the 17th, I would like us to think about reasons why we want to particularly select whatever we're going to select, positive reasons, because we're, as a board, we need to have a good reason why. And I ask for people to give us good reasons why if they have reasons. I've heard reasons, well, it's better, or I don't like it. But as a board, we need to have good reasons why we move forward.
Is everyone getting contacted by the public? 'Cause I'm getting.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I've received more email on this than any subject, I think, since I've been on the board.
Say what?
I have received more email on this subject than I have on any subject.
I'm getting 40, 50 emails a day, and I'm getting a lot of phone calls, not that many, but 5 or 6 phone calls.
I think I'm getting significant amounts of email, but I'm also getting stopped at Hy-Vee.
Oh,
Yeah, gas station.
Amoco.
Yeah.
And people are talking about school board stuff in a manner that they have not in the last 7 years.
And I've
So
been in some of the buildings, and you get a lot of questions when you're in the buildings.
So I want to reiterate, we haven't decided anything here tonight. It's a work session.
Well, you can't decide anything.
We cannot. Anything else? If not, I'm going to adjourn it.
thank you, Brian.
Thank you to Alan
can't make that
and
motion.
everybody that was here tonight to give input.
To do what?
We'll call it closed. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you coming.